Welcome to Lecture 7, Chapter 4. To conclude this lecture, I'd like to draw some conclusions from the results of the Deep Decarbonization Pathways project, but also from the very process of the project for the official, this time, international negotiations and the agreement to be reached in Paris at COP21 in December 2015. So what are these lessons? Well, in essence, what the results and also the approach of the DDPP reveal is the critical importance of preparing these country-level deep decarbonization pathways to 2050. These pathways and the discussion of their results, the discussion of their assumptions are essential tools for learning and problem solving. This process is absolutely fundamental to developing a long-term vision for deep decarbonization and shaping the expectations of the different countries, the businesses, the investors about what are really the future development opportunities. It really affords a unique opportunity to work together, as we've done as part of the project, but we now hope this is going to become an issue for the real world, an opportunity to work together across countries to map out how the global 2-degree limit can be operationalized, because we have it, but it needs to be made real and achieved at the country level. More precisely, it also highlights the need to introduce what I called long-term backcasting into the scope of the climate negotiations preparing COP21. Because as we have already pointed out, unfortunately, the current focus of the negotiations is primarily and in fact almost exclusively on mitigation targets in the relatively short term. Maybe for the year 2030, some countries are even suggesting that the focus should be on 2025 emission reduction targets. Yet, as I hope we made clear through this lecture, if countries do not work with a longer term time horizon in mind and backcast from this long-term target, they're likely to adopt strategies that fall short of what is needed to stay below the 2-degree limit. So almost by its structure, but by definition, if you want, the current incremental approach will fail to consider the deep systemic changes that are needed and the key technologies that are still pre-commercial but that need to be developed to reach the long-term goal. Surprisingly, and to be frank, also quite shockingly, very few countries so far have developed such long-term deep decarbonization pathways, which means that very few of them have looked seriously at what it means for them to stay within the 2-degree limit. Since Copenhagen in 2009 and a year after that Cancun in 2010, all the large emitting countries have adopted quantified targets to reduce their greenhouse gases emissions by the year 2020. But these targets, and I want to say that sometimes they have to be backed by concrete policy action plans, because it's not always the case, but even more profoundly than that, these targets are collectively insufficient to put the world on a trajectory that would be consistent with the 2-degree limit. In fact, most of the 2020 emission reduction targets that were adopted in Copenhagen in 2009 were framed as either incremental deviation from business as usual trends, or rather small reductions in the carbon intensity of GDP, or rather modest decrease in absolute emissions compared to a given base year, most of the time 1990. But by and large, these country targets were not even derived from an assessment of what is needed simply to stay within the 2-degree limit. So it should really not come as a surprise that they're widely insufficient to limit global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. But if we want to succeed, and to be frank, simply if we want to be internally consistent, if we want to have country targets that are consistent with the global goal, then we need to adopt a completely different approach to the climate negotiations on the run-up to Paris in December 2015. To conclude, I'd like to say that at least 2 new elements will need to be part of the global deal at COP21 in Paris. And they certainly do not cover the full scope of the agreement, in particular the need to provide adequate support, all different types of support, financial, technological, capacity building, to the countries that need it to undertake the necessary mitigation and adaptation actions, in particular the poor and vulnerable countries. But I want to emphasize these 2 new dimensions as, I think, an essential component to the success of the global negotiations in Paris. First, we need a shared global commitment that each country will develop and make publicly available a deep decarbonization pathway to 2050 that is consistent with the 2-degree limit, but also with country national circumstances. These pathways to 2050, as opposed to the targets by 2025 or 2030, do not necessarily have to be binding. I mean, it's not the main point of having them. They should be predicated on a shared commitment to the 2-degree limit, but also to all the aspects of the global cooperation that will be needed to achieve it in some countries, in particular the poor countries, including the technology cooperation, financial support, the policy cooperation. But it's really very important that every country has one, and has one soon, because it's the only way to explore how you can make your economic growth, your development pathway, consistent with our global objective of avoiding dangerous climate change. So that's the first element, pathways to 2050 for each and every country. The second element is that we need a absolutely massive and sustained global public-private effort to develop, demonstrate, and diffuse many new low-carbon technologies which we discussed and are not yet technically mature or competitive, but yet are absolutely key to the success of deep decarbonization strategies. They will need to be made available to all countries, so a technology cooperation mechanisms, but also fund will have to be established to this purpose. But it's also very important that businesses and governments, the national science funds, for example, commit to real money this time and serious action to develop these new technologies. By the time we record this course, we have already published the interim 2014 report of the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project. The report was received by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. We launched the interim report at a press conference in the UN headquarters on July 8 of 2014. We've also submitted the report to the French Foreign Minister, Laurent Fabius, who will be the president of the COP21 in Paris. And we've started to discuss about the project with many different people across the globe. In particular, we've discussed the project in the context of what is called the Major Economies Forum. So that's a political forum gathering all the largest emitting countries, and we presented the results of the project to all the energy and climate ministers attending the meeting. We're very encouraged by the support that we received so far. We're clearly not there yet. It's not yet the primary focus of the negotiations. People want to understand that a bit better, what it really means, what it really implies, and how it can be operationalized in the context of the agreement to be reached in Paris in 2015. But there is clearly a momentum around this new approach. Much more effort is still needed, and we count on you. We count on your creativity to develop your own country deep decarbonization pathway. Looking forward to receive them. And we count also on your commitment to put pressure on the political negotiation process to make COP21 in Paris a real success.